This video is brought to you by Driver61. Driver61 now has a motorsports store, so if you're looking to buy a new racing helmet, overalls or more, head over to driver61.com/shop for some great deals. Hi, I'm Scott Mansell from Driver61 and welcome to our definitive circuit guide to the Portimao Circuit, otherwise known as Algarve International Circuit. The Portimao Circuit is 4.7 kilometers long with 16 turns. Lots of gradient. It's a fantastic circuit with some quick and slow corners. And in this circuit guide I'm going to show you braking references, racing lines and how to get the most out of the circuit here in Portugal. So here we are on the start-finish straight. For those of you who will be racing at the circuit, you can see here we're just on the grid. We've got the starting gantry in this area and the start lights just up in front of us here. Just important to know if you are going to be starting a race here at the Portimao Circuit. So the start-finish straight is actually quite long, and we're coming down towards turn 1 here. Now, turn 1 is a relatively quick right-hander. The braking zone is quite tricky because just as we're going over this point now, the circuit goes downhill quite substantially before it levels off and we go into the right-hander of turn 1. You can already see on the left-hand side here that we've got a braking reference, the 250 meter board on the left-hand side here. Now you can push the braking zone quite deep here. We've got a bit of runoff on the outside, so it means that you can take a few more risks than you would normally if there's just grass on the outside. So that's something to bear in mind. And again, we've got lots of references for the braking zone, but in most cars, in the Radicals, in the GT cars that I've been to Portimao in, we can actually get just beyond the crest of the dip here before we get on the brakes. And as you can see here, we've got lots of references on the left-hand side. We've got this white marker, for example, as we come here. It's probably still too early for most cars, but there's lots of references on the left-hand side here. So the Marshall's point here, 150 board here, the start of the grass on the left here, the 100 meter board just down here. So the important thing is that you pick your reference on the first couple of laps. Obviously make it a little bit too early and then move yourself down into the braking zone, so you're pushing yourself later and later and later into turn 1 here. Now as you're coming down the hill, the apex of turn 1 is actually quite easy to recognize. Just on the top of the screen here, you can just see that there's a yellow hint of a curb. Now this is actually a huge sausage curb on the inside of the corner, so you do need to be careful of that when you're coming through turn 1. But as visuals go, as looking for the apex goes, this is a fantastic point. So as you can see, we're on board here with one of my clients, Yanni Herpy, in the European Radical SR3 Championship. He's very quick, that's why we're using his onboard footage, but he could be a little bit further over to the left-hand side here on the track. I think his wheel is probably just about here if you're taking the absolute point. We could be a little bit further over to the right, possibly just a little bit onto the entry curb here. Not too much because it can be quite rough, but just a little bit, just touching it so you know where the entry curb is on the left-hand side. And as you can see now, at this point, all we should be doing is focusing our attention on this apex curb on the inside. As I mentioned, we don't want to be hitting it, but as a visual for the apex goes, it's a fantastic point to check out. Yanni here has gone down a couple of gears into 4th in the Radical, which obviously has quite a lot of downforce and is bringing the car in here. Got a little bit of understeer, as you can see through the steering wheel here, but as I mentioned, you do not want to hit this curb. It's huge. When you're walking around the circuit, you can see it's a massive curb and it could cause some damage to your car if you do run over it. Now this yellow apex curb is something that you'll see as we go around the Portimao Circuit. It's on a majority of the corners, so it makes making the apex or finding the apex with your vision quite easy to do because they're always perfectly on the apex of the corner. So at this point we want to be running right up against the sausage here but not hitting the yellow sausage on the inside. And then it's the case of moving your vision towards the outside of the circuit. Now as you can see, there's a little bit of a crest here. It's quite difficult to see the exit or the outside of the corner here, but as you do more and more laps, you'll find where that is, and you'll really understand your positioning on the circuit. So we just let the car run to the outside here, and as I mentioned, and as you can see here, there's plenty of runoff on the outside. So if you do make a mistake, it's not the end of the world, and you can just bring the car back on the circuit. So we want to be using quite a lot of the curb on the outside here. You can see that Yanni's used the absolutely perfect amount here. Remember, we are in Europe. It's not the same track limit regulations that we have in the UK. So he can only keep one tyre on the inside of the white line here, rather than only using the curb in like the rules that we have in the UK. So he's used the absolute perfect amount here, and again now his vision should be moved up to the apex of turn 2, which in most cars is flat out. Even in a high-powered GT car, quite heavy, you can just about get through this right-hander flat out. So we're keeping the car on the outside for quite a long time. It's quite easy here to turn into turn 2 a little bit too early, and then that pushes you out on the exit. So you just need to bear that in mind. Try and keep the car to the outside a reasonable amount of time before we then bring the car towards the inside. And again, we want to be using all of the road on the inside. Now you just have to be careful here. There is a slight bump. You can see slight colour change in the tarmac here. There's a slight bump just as you go into turn 2. So you just need to be careful that it doesn't unsettle your car too much and just cause a little bit of oversteer. So just be wary of that as you're building up your speed through turn 2. And again, we've got the big sausage on the inside of the turn here, so we just need to be careful that we don't take any of this yellow curb, because it will really unsettle the car. So next up, turn 3. It's quite challenging because it's a 180-degree hairpin right, but the issue is that we've got the car turning at this point now where we are, and we need to try and get the platform of the car flat as soon as possible so we can maximize our braking. So in the radical, with short braking distances and it being fairly nimble, you can go quite deep into the corner here, as you can see. Now Jan is on the brakes. You can see he's on the brakes from back here, and he's just been able to get the steering flat and the car nice and level, so we have stable braking in a straight line. Now, in a GT car, you'll be arriving at this point a little bit quicker, and it's not as nimble as the radical. So one thing to bear in mind is that you may have to change your line through turn 2 so you can get the car turned a little bit earlier, get the platform flat so that you can then get on the brakes in a straight line and minimize this braking zone. So in terms of the braking zone, it's all relatively simple. But with the braking references, as I spoke about at turn 1, here we're kind of braking on feel, because you're coming through turn 2. How the car's attitude is through turn 2 depends on where you get on the brakes, and also there aren't many braking references on the outside of the circuit here. There's not much to go by. So really, your braking into turn 3 is all about having good vision, having a good understanding of the car, and braking by feel rather than having an absolute reference point. So we're coming down into turn 3 now. Again, on the inside of turn 3, you can see that there's a big yellow sausage on the inside. So that's where we're aiming for. You can see from this point that it's quite late on in the corner, and that's because we want to make the apex nice and late through turn 3 so that we open up turn 4 as much as possible, which is a left-hander that goes uphill and over a crest. Now, you'll see here, as we come through turn 3, Yanni's bringing the car in nice and gently. He'll have his eyes on the yellow curbing on the inside. He's got a bit of understeer there. You can see how much steering angle he's got in the car, but he's made the apex quite well there. But in the radical, on the exit of turn 3, he uses a substantial amount of road on the left-hand side. Now, this is because the radical has a lot of grip for the power that it has. You can see that turn 4 comes up over the crest and through the left-hander here. Now, there's a straight after this turn 4, so it's important that our exit through turn 4 is as quick as possible so that we carry that speed down the next straight. Now, in the radical, with it not having so much power and with it having a lot of grip, we can actually keep the car quite a long way across here, so we don't have to get all the way over to the left to open up turn 4. Because even in this positioning that you can see with the radical, we can keep the next left-hander flat out. Now, if you're in a quicker car or a car that has less grip, you'll actually have to restrict the exit here of turn 3 so that you'll keep the car a little bit tighter through here so that you can get all the way back over to the left, therefore opening turn 4 up as you go up over the crest, opening it up as much as possible so you can carry as much speed through there as possible and carry that all the way down the next straight. However, we're on board with the radical, so Jan is on a good line here. Notice he's only bringing the car back over to the middle of the track here because that radical is so nimble and it has so much grip. You can still see here that he's still flat out on the accelerator, and he should remain flat out all the way through the left here. Now it's a little bit difficult to see the apex as you're coming into turn 4 here. There's no yellow sausage curb and it's up over a crest, so it is quite difficult. However, usually you'll see that on the inside here, some of the grass will have been rubbed away by a GT car or even some sports cars. So that's how you know where the apex is. You can just see it here just as you're coming up over the crest. But how do you see that from back here? Well, really, again, it's all about feel. It's all about knowing where your car is. And you do need to have your vision up here on the left-hand side. It's important that you have your vision a long way ahead of yourself. But you just really need a little bit of experience at this point because you can't exactly see where you're going. As you can see, Jan is still flat out on the accelerator, which is great. It means that he's going to carry a lot of speed through and down the next straight. Now the exit here, again, you can't see a lot of it, so again it's to do with feel, and at this point you do just need to be careful as you come up over the crest that the rear of the car doesn't become light and you get a little bit of oversteer. It happens almost every time when you're right on the limit that as you come up over this crest you'll get a bit of oversteer and you'll wiggle your way over this exit curb, and you could just see there that Yanni might have had, just see his hands here moving around. So he might just have a tiny little bit of oversteer there as he's coming out the corner. In terms of the exit, there is a reasonable amount of runoff on the outside here. There's tarmac on the outside and then gravel beyond that. Obviously we don't want to be going much further than that, but if you do make a mistake or you do get on the throttle that little bit early or get a bit of an oversteer, you can easily run wide and come back onto the circuit. Yanni's not used all the road on the outside here. Didn't need to, but he could if he wants to. The curb isn't too rough on the outside, so you can use all of the curb on the exit there. Then it's a case of coming down to turn 5, quite bumpy on the outside of the track here, and you can see we're coming downhill into a tight left-hander that's a hairpin. Really important to be nice and late on the brakes here, and there's lots of references on the outside. So first of all, we have the start of the entry curb on the right hand side here, and then as we're coming down you have the start of the grass on the right hand side, or the split between the grass and the green tarmac, and as you go down you can see that there's other points. There's a white line here on the right hand side, so you have plenty of opportunities to really get a good braking reference for yourself. And it's the same as turn 1. Begin 20% further back than you need to, and gradually as you get more confident with the track and more confident with your car at that specific point, get later and later on the brakes. But you've got lots of references on the right hand side here to really maximize your braking. Now one thing just to be careful of coming down into turn 5 is that it is quite bumpy on the outside here. You can see Yanni's car's just moving around a little bit on the brakes as he's coming down the gears. So just be careful of the bumps. Keeping the car at this point over to the right hand side as much as possible, and on the inside here you can see that there's another yellow sausage curb, so it's really easy to spot as you're coming down the hill. As we're braking down the hill you just need to be a little bit careful on the brakes. Obviously the braking distance will be that little bit longer because we are coming downhill, and the momentum of the car and the difference in the brake bias will mean that you'll have to get on the brakes that little bit earlier. Now on the outside here there is a little bit of runoff, but if you do overshoot the braking by 5 or 10 meters, you are going to end up in the gravel here. So it is wise to be quite careful as you're coming on the brakes down here into turn 5. So at this point, Jan is bringing the car in. We can't quite see it here, but he'll have his vision on the yellow curb on the inside. And we're bringing the car in. You can see here with his steering angle, he's got too much understeer. Probably got off the brakes a little bit too early and the car isn't turning as well as he might want. So he's just missed the inside curbing here. It won't have cost him too much time, but it will have cost him half a tenth or a tenth or so. You can see that it's just at this point here, if you look at the steering, it's picked up a bit of understeer and we've sailed past that apex. Now, coming out of here, we've got a short straight, so it is important that you get on the power nice and early. You can see a bit of rotation in the radical here with Yanni straightening up the steering wheel and moving the car around to the outside. You can see there's a lot of runoff on the outside here. Don't really know why we need it. It isn't that important, but you can use all of the curb on the outside and a little bit more. Little brake bias adjustment here for Yanni, moving it to the front, probably locked up the rears as he was coming down the hill, which is understandable. Then turn 6 in most cars is flat out, before we've then got a sweeping right that turns into a tighter right as you go up a hill. So through here, when you're learning the circuit, it's all about confidence. It's flat in most cars, but you just need to know exactly where you are and have a number of laps, just because you can't see where you're going. It's blind as you're coming in. You can see that we are making the apex nice and late here because we need to get on the brakes, keep the car's platform flat before we go into turn 7. But all the way back here, you can see, just as a reference, you can see that we've got the orange Marshall's point on the end of the fence here. And we'll be joining, making the apex at the end of the curb on the left-hand side. So now we're moving forwards into turn 7. It's quite a tricky corner, actually. Change of tarmac surface here that you can see. Now this is a great reference for when you're trying to push yourself a little deeper into turn 7. As you're coming through the corner, the blind corner, and then it all opens up in front of you here, it's just a good reference to know exactly how far through you are. So if you're trying to keep it flat, as Yanni here is, it's a good reference to know that when you go over this change of tarmac, then there's a point where you need to brake and bring the car in. However, we are in the radical and the braking points are very short and very late, so this will be later than a lot of cars. So as you can see here, he's got the steering wheel straight and the car's platform flat. Now in GT cars and quicker cars than the Radical SR3 here, you'll be needing a brake to get through turn 7. However, the Radical, you can turn in flat and just lift as you're coming through there. Now that's all very quick, and what you're looking out for as you're coming into turn 7 is again this yellow sausage curb. It's very quick as you're coming in here, so it's really important that you don't turn in too early and take a lump out of the car with the sausage curb. However, it's a great visual reference. You can see it's a little bit bumpy through here, bringing the car into the apex, and then what's important now is you can see the circuit continues around here and it tightens up almost into a hairpin that goes up the next hill. So what's important here is that you get the car's platform flat as soon as possible. Here you can see Yanni's got the steering wheel straight so that we can maximize our braking zone, minimize the distance that we are braking for, and knock off as much speed as we can before we go into turn 8. So get the car's platform flat, get on the brakes before you then go into turn 8. Now in the Radical we can do all this very late because it's such a nimble car. In a GT car or a track day car, you may have to adapt your line slightly through turn 7 to get the platform of the car flatter sooner, get the steering wheel straighter sooner, so you can get on the brakes, get the thing slowed down before we then go into turn 8. So keeping your steering wheel straight, as straight as possible, on the brakes, and you can see gently bringing the car in towards that yellow sausage curb on the inside, rolling off the brakes as we come in here. At this point we can actually carry a reasonable amount of speed coming into the apex. You kind of roll off the brakes, send the speed into the apex, and again that short sausage curb on the inside here is the perfect point where we should be making the apex. So it brings the car in, and again we're getting on the throttle here and we can't really see where we're going, so it will take you a little bit of experience of the Portimao circuit to exactly know where you are. So you can see here Yanni's using all the road on the outside, could possibly use a little bit more, but that will come from experience because at this point he can't really see where he's going. So just rewind that just a second because it is tricky to get on the throttle here. At this point you can't really see the exit curb, so it's a case of circuit experience and knowing exactly the positioning of your car. So let the car push out. It does feel like you're coming to the outside of the circuit a little bit too early, but just let the car run out here and use all the curb on the outside. Now, as we come up over this next crest, at this point where we've got the change in surface, we should be beginning to bring the car back over to the right hand side. And as we're coming over the crest here, we should be somewhere in the middle of the road. Now we're coming up to the amazing turn 9, which is a really quick left-hander, flat out in the radical, almost flat out in a lot of GT cars. It's downhill, you apex, and then it goes uphill into a really technical section. So as we're coming over the crest here, again, as I said, we're in the middle of the road, bringing the car over to the right. Now we can begin to see the whole of the circuit. So we've got the really quick turn 9 here, and it doesn't have a sausage curb on the inside, so you're not having any help there. But we're bringing the car over to the right hand side, using all of the road on the right here. We want to be using as much of this entry curb as we possibly can to open up turn 9 as much as possible. Our vision's a long way ahead of us, looking forwards here, so that we're giving ourselves the most amount of time to make our decisions about how quick we can come into turn 9. Now in this radical, it's flat out, so bringing it in nice and gently, just changing up to 5th there, and using not too much of the curb on the left hand side. Now if you're in a GT car, or if you need to use more of the road, if it isn't quite flat out, then yes, please use all of the curb on the left hand side here. It won't disrupt the car too much, and it means that you'll open up the corner that little bit more. Now as we're coming through turn 9 here, you can see that it's again, we're going uphill quite steeply again, and we can't see the next section of the circuit. Now it is tricky coming through this next section of turns 10 and turn 11. Turn 10 is tightening into turn 11. You can see Yanni's line's quite different here. Now there's a number of different things that you can do. So in a GT car, we'll probably be running over to the right hand side a little bit more, and we'll actually brake across the curb on the inside into turn 10 and 11. So let me just run through so you can see exactly where the circuit goes. So bringing it over to the right here, so you can see this section is actually a braking zone for turn 10. You can see, for turn 11, sorry, you can see the yellow sausage curb on the inside, and then we're through turns 10 and 11 and we head into turn 12. So you can see here it's technically very difficult because we're coming up over a crest, we're braking into a tightening corner, so it's quite tricky. Now the thing with the radical is Yanni is so nimble that Yanni can get the car back over to the left hand side over here and then brake across the circuit here. Now in a car that has less grip or is less nimble, you'll actually still be on the right hand side of the circuit here and braking in a straight line across the curb. But Yanni can actually have a few more degrees, get the car turned across, so he has less turning to do through turn 10, which means he can carry more speed through there and so minimize his lap time. So as we're coming up over the crest here, we're trying to get the steering wheel straight so that we've got the car's platform as flat as possible, and therefore we can optimize the braking zone. He's braking in a straight line but across the corner here, so really turn 10 in a radical, in a track day car, in a GT car, turn 10 is a braking zone. We're just using it to decelerate and come into turn 11. Now you can see that he's just in the middle of the road here. If you're too tight over to the right hand side here, then it makes turn 11 way too tight and you'll get a bad exit coming out. If you're too wide here, what actually happens is because you're decelerating, you won't be able to get the car back into turn 11. You'll just understeer wide, or you just won't be able to turn the car in well enough. So middle of the road, where Yanni is now, is where he's positioned, is about right. All we're doing is focusing our attention on this yellow sausage curb on the inside here. Still decelerating. Maybe we're rolling off the brakes now and bringing the car into the apex. You can see Yanni's steering. He's got a little bit of understeer here again. So it's probably that we probably made a setup change after this session because he's just got that little bit too much understeer. So he's made the apex on the right hand side here, and again you can see that the track falls away beyond us into turns 12 and 13. Now again, coming through this corner, it's a little bit of a compromise. The radical can use quite a lot of track here because the next turn into 12 is easy flat for the radical. But if you're in a GT car or a track day car, something that has less grip and more power ratio than the radical, you're probably going to want to be a little bit further over to the right hand side here so that you can open up turn 12, get it back over to the right hand side here and open up this section of track. Turn 12 is pretty much flat out in most cars, even the quick GT stuff. As long as they've got a little bit of aero, they can get through here flat out. But you can see that Yanni didn't need to get back over to the right hand side here because the Radical has so much grip it can come through the left hander flat out anyway. So he's turning it in, and again it's quite difficult to find the apex here. It's something that you'll get with experience around the Portimao Circuit. It's something that you just need to know and feel the positioning is right of your car as you're coming through turn 12 here. So we're coming up through the apex. Again, you can see as in turn 4, the apex has been rubbed away slightly by some GT or saloon cars. So as you pass that marker, it's just good to know that your car's in the right position and you can get back on the throttle or keep the throttle flat out as you're coming through turn 12. As you can see, the exit is really, really tricky to see here, and we're not using all of the road on the outside. Now the problem is that if you do run off the end of the curb here, the circuit actually falls away down here. You can see there's a gradient as you fall down here. So if you do fall off the end of the curb, you end up going all the way over here, which you don't want to do. It's going to cost you loads of time. It's not one of those runoff zones where you just skate off and then come back on. It's a runoff zone where you go off and you lose 10 seconds. So you don't want to run off the end of the curb here because it's going to cost you a substantial amount of time. Next up, we've got a hairpin left of turn 13. It's quite tricky because you've just come through turn 12. There's a lot to do. We need to get the car's platform as flat as possible, get that steering wheel straight so we can brake at the optimum rate. Now, there aren't many references on the right hand side here, so again it's something that you need to do with feel. You can see that the Radical is actually braking where this white line is here, but our vision isn't really going to be over here, and it's a little bit too far away to see in our peripheral vision. Our vision should be down here at the apex. So the braking zone into turn 13 is actually a feely type of braking zone. You just need to know where the car is, maybe use a couple of the bumps as references, but visually there isn't much going on here. Now, as we come into turn 13, you might just want to stay away from the outside of the circuit here. It's difficult to see in the video, but at this point here, there's some kind of issue with the circuit, and there's quite a big bump or a divot in the track. So if you run over this section here, you'll probably lock up the outside front tyre, and it can cause some understeer as you go in. So you could just keep the car just to the right hand side, just a little bit, to stay out of this bump. Obviously, when you go to the track, you'll see the bump. You can just see it here. If you watch the front of the Radical go down now, you can just see it there. Yanni's gone over it. So maybe in the Radical, maybe the Radical's okay to run over it. But I've been there in a lot of GT cars where you run over the bump or the divot on the outside, and it triggers the ABS, and then you just run wide all the way through the corner. So through turn 13 here, we're bringing it in nice and gently. You can see that we've got the big yellow sausage curb on the inside, so it's easy to spot the apex. Bring the car into the apex again. Yanni's just missed it slightly. We've got that little bit of understeer here, so we might need a slight change on the dampers on the front of his car. And then we're letting the car push all the way to the outside. Now, on the outside here, there's gravel, so don't run wide. We've got a nice standard curb on the outside, so you can use all of the curbing on the outside. However, it's a bit of a compromise because coming through turn 14 and 15, we need to get the car back over to the right-hand side somewhat so that we can get the car through the next 180 degrees. So we come through turn 13, the track goes downhill a little bit, and then we've got a right-hander followed by turn 15, which is another right-hander that opens up slightly, which is quite an important corner. So Yanni's bringing the car back over to the left-hand side here as much as he can, turning the car again. Now, the Radical, again, is so nimble that he can come in here and he's not getting on the brakes until this point here where he's got the car's platform pretty much flat. Now, again, the line in a GT car might be slightly different. I think that if you're coming out of turn 13 here, you probably only get the GT car back to the middle of the track before you get on the brakes and go into 14. It's because the GT car has a lot of power compared to the amount of grip it has, whereas the Radical actually has a lot more grip than it has power, and you can afford to come back over to the left before you go into the right-hander. However, it's bringing the car back in. Very tricky coming through turn 14 here. You can see that the circuit slopes away down here. It's downhill, and then it turns into an off-camber corner. So it's quite tricky. Really easy to overstep the mark. Really easy to make a mistake here. So for me, every time that I come through here, I have to go probably 5 or 10% slower than what my brain is telling me. Because if I do carry the speed in that I want to carry in, I'll make a mistake. I'll get a bit of oversteer because I've trailed the brakes in too far, or I'll get too much understeer because I've got off the brakes a little bit too soon and carried too much speed in. You can see there's no yellow sausage curb on the inside. However, the grass has been worn away just a little bit, but we're making the apex quite early here. And then as we're coming through, we need to shift our focus, our vision forward as much as we can. And we're looking all the way around to the outside of the circuit, around here, looking for some white markers on the outside of the circuit so we can gauge how we can get on the accelerator. Now Yanni's in the low powered Radical, so he's got on the throttle nice and early. His position is good. You can see that we don't make the apex of turn 15 here on the inside. We're running the car somewhere in the middle of the track, and again it will depend on your type of car. A GT car will have a squarer line. You'll turn the car more in the mid corner so that you can get the platform flatter on the exit and then get on the throttle that little bit sooner and carry the speed down the straight. But with the Radical, you can carry more corner speed through there, and we're pushing ourselves out. So really the exit point is all the way around here. See the white line that goes across the track? You can see it better when you're actually driving on the circuit rather than in this video. That's where we're going to be letting the car push out to. So when you're in a GT car, you need to be looking all the way out there. You can see there that we've just made the outside just before that white line. Now there's a bit of run-off on the outside. There's no real reason why you should be running too wide here, but just so you know, there is a little bit of run-off on the outside. So finally we have turn 16 here on the Portimao Circuit. It's an amazing corner. So you come in, there's a little crest, the circuit drops away as you're turning right, and then you come back uphill onto the start-finish straight. All of that, and it's almost flat out in most cars. So we're already coming out of turn 15 in fourth gear here in the Radical, and coming into turn 16, just about to change into fifth. Now, in most cars, it's almost flat out. In the Radical, it's flat out. In a GT car, it's almost flat out. So anything with a little bit of aero, it would be very, very close to whether it's flat out. Even in a car that doesn't have aero and a lot of power, it's a very, very quick corner. So really exciting, and it's a lot of fun. So what we're doing here, firstly, it's important that we don't turn into turn 16 too early. The lizard part of your brain is, because you're going quickly, is trying to get you to turn in to the apex as soon as possible. However, we need to restrict that, because if we turn in too early, we'll get pushed out on the exit, and then it will be a problem. So the way that you solve that is just to have in your peripheral vision the entry curb on the left hand side here. Now we want to be turning in, gently turning the car in just before the end of the entry curb on the outside here. So you can see that as the curb comes back across, that's when we want to be turning the car in towards the apex. In terms of spotting your apex, you can see here that there's another piece of track on the right hand side, and then we've got the apex curb on the inside too. And that's what we want to be aiming for. We want to be aiming for just after this triangle on the right hand side here. So you can see we're just passing the triangle on the right hand side. As we're coming over the crest, that's when we're making the apex, just there. Now if you do want to be a little bit greedy, you can use a little bit more of the road here. It doesn't unsettle the car that little bit too much. But the exit coming out of turn 16 is critically important, because then we've got a massive straight running down the start finish. So it's really important that you get on the throttle here as soon as you possibly can. The corner continues all the way around here. It's a lot of degrees as we're coming through here. But by this point, when you come into the compression as the circuit's coming down, so as you can see, the circuit continues to come downhill, and as you get to this point that I've circled here, maybe a little bit further on, the car compresses and all of a sudden you get more grip, so you can get back on the throttle at that point. So In the radical, as I've mentioned, it's flat out here. In a GT car, you'll be bringing the car in and you'll be waiting at this point, waiting for the car to settle down. And now, as we come into the compression, everything will settle down and you can really begin to get on the throttle quite hard and hopefully flat out to carry the speed all the way through onto the start-finish straight. As I said, it's really important that we're getting on the throttle as soon as possible here as we come into the compression to carry that speed all the way down the start-finish straight. Now at this point, our vision just needs to be as far ahead as we can, looking around the corner here, so that we can just let the car push all the way outside. Hopefully we won't need to lift again. If you do that, you're going to lose a lot of time coming down the start-finish straight. And we're just going to use all of the curb on the left-hand side here. Again, as you can see, there's a lot of runoff on the outside here. So if you do run a little bit wide or you catch a little bit of oversteer, it's not the end of the world. You can run onto the runoff, come back onto the circuit, and it won't have cost you too much time. And more importantly, you're not going to have an accident. So finally, we have the pit entrance just here on the right-hand side. Important to know if you're racing or testing at the Portimao Circuit. As you can see, the run up to the start-finish line is uphill. It then plateaus before we then go back down again into turn one. You can see that the start-finish line is just here. So the flag will go out just from this post on the right-hand side here. Important to know for the end of the sessions and any warnings that you may get during the race. So thank you very much for watching this definitive circuit guide to the Portimao Circuit. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've been here, if you've got any extra tips for the circuit, please leave them in the comments below. If you'd like to watch more videos like this from the Driver 61 channel, please subscribe to us. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.